She's back. Senua.
Senua's back. He doesn't even know.
How can he not know?
Oh my god, what is happening right now?
He has to play the game.
Don't play it. It's a trick.
You have to.
Do it.
Quickly.
Go on, play it now.
Okay, I'm going.
Truth be told, I've been hotly anticipating the follow-up to Ninja Theory's so-called AA title from 2017. There were long periods of near radio silence, and I worried the project might have slipped away, but eventually we got some more promotional material with one of the most kick-ass trailers I've ever seen, and then on May 21st, it finally came. There had been some buzz pre-release about the game's length, with people worrying about the game only being 6 to 7 hours. This didn't worry me, as the first game is about the same length and it uses its time expertly. In fact, the first game managed to do a great many things right. It's easily in my top 10 games of all time. So I was chomping at the bit to play the next entry, and what I found while playing through it surprised me. First of all, the visuals in this game are pure wizardry. The sheer fidelity is unprecedented. You know those tech demos that Unreal puts out for their new engines? The ones that blow you away but ultimately don't really materialize in an actual game? Senua Saga is legitimately a playable version of those demos. If you scrub through a let's play of this game, it's like the whole thing's a cutscene. It's that impressive. There were a few times I stopped moving the left stick because I figured a cutscene had started, but then Senua stopped moving. Even just walking down a path, taking in the surroundings, I frequently found myself in disbelief at what I was seeing. This is unquestionably the most high-fidelity game I've ever seen. It's obvious throughout the game that the budget has increased dramatically since Hellblade 1. Unfortunately, this budget seems to work against the game in a lot of places.
Which brings me to the second thing that surprised me about Senua Saga. I didn't like it as much as I thought I would. I had been won over by the pre-release footage and the visuals and the quality of the first game, but as I got deeper into Hellblade 2, I kept finding myself wanting something more.
Where Senua's Sacrifice was a thoughtful meditation on psychosis, loss, and trauma integrated into a compelling Shakespearean tragedy, Senua's Saga unfortunately kind of feels like the amusement park spin-off of Senua's story. Ninja Theory have a troubled development history with a number of one-off titles that they wished to develop into franchises or at least make a sequel for, but they never got the opportunity. Now they've finally been given the green light, but it feels like they had a very specific story to tell with the first game, and after that they kind of just had to make up something else for the character to do. The previous story revolved entirely around Senua and her inner turmoil. Any other characters that were present were really in her mind, portrayed from the camera's point of view or portrayed by actors on a live camera. It's a sign of the budget they were working with, but they were truly creative solutions that are rarely seen in the medium and really serve to emphasize the isolation and focus of the story. Senua's Saga introduces a full cast of characters with proper character models that actually interact with Senua and the environment, which on paper is an obvious upgrade. But the narrative focus is lost in the process. The first game's premise couldn't be more clear or more compelling. Senua is journeying into hell itself to rescue the soul of her loved one, Dillion. In the sequel, I had trouble for a large part of the game figuring out exactly what Senua's aim was. And in the end, the journey doesn't feel as narratively satisfying as it should. Instead of a deeply personal journey, Hellblade II is essentially about freeing a foreign land from tyranny. It's a noble pursuit, but it really failed to compel me throughout my playthrough. It takes a while for this mission to be spelled out, and overall the narrative just feels more generic than I would have liked. Pretty much all the characters that are introduced feel very archetypal and don't do much to make me care about them, and the overall plot seems to play on the Chosen One storyline, which we've seen a million times, without doing much to differentiate itself. I do appreciate that the devs don't dwell on the plot threads that were resolved in the last game, and Senua has evolved as a character. She's more sure of herself and has moved into a new phase of her relationship with the voices in her head. Again, on paper these decisions make sense, but in practice Senua becomes a less interesting character as a result. Most of her personal motivation has been lost and replaced with a sense of obligation to help those in need.
Now I do want to take a moment to qualify all this. It may sound at this point like I'm saying the entire experience is uninteresting or straight up bad. Hellblade II is not a bad game. It's very, very competent.
The structure of the story, the music, the visuals, the performances, all these things are done with great skill. You can tell this team is experienced. But there are just too many little things in the game that add up to make the experience fall short of its potential. This is evident in the gameplay as well. Ninja Theory made a number of decisions in this department that missed the mark, some of which I can understand, but ultimately disagree with. Let's start with the combat. I quite enjoyed the combat in the first game. It's no Devil May Cry, but you can get into a nice flow and pull off some satisfying, if simple, combos. It seems in this game they took a step back for the sake of a cinematic feel. The devs have stripped back the number of enemies you face off against. Before, you could face up to 3 or 4 enemies at once. It was very intimate and your camera would focus on only one at a time, but the others would still pose a threat. Now you only ever face one foe at a time. There may technically be other enemies present, but they'll never attack you out of turn. At most, they'll shove your current enemy out of the way and take their place. I would assume the combat was tweaked this way to integrate more dynamic and elaborate animations. Senua does interact with enemies in a more fluid way that is technically impressive, but mechanically less satisfying than being able to maintain more control and overcome larger groups of enemies. Not to mention the fact that the number of moves you can pull off has also been reduced, so it feels like a more on-rails experience with less room for experimentation. It also seems there's just less combat overall, and most curiously, there are virtually no boss fights. There is arguably one at the end, which I won't spoil, but at that point it was too little too late. Senua's Sacrifice featured a small selection of very exciting boss fights, each of which had their own unique attacks and methods of overcoming them, not to mention the narrative and visual elements which heightened the tensions even further. What we get instead is a series of spectacle-based encounters with the main antagonistic force, the giants. In place of an actual fight, you'll try to approach these giants while avoiding some kind of environmental hazard. This is part of what made me think of the amusement ride. It's cool looking and gives you a thrill in the moment, but looking back on it, the experience doesn't leave much of an impact.
Now, I've made a lot of comparisons to the first game in this video, but I'm not necessarily advocating that Ninja Theory just do the same thing again, but I just don't think the alternatives they chose really work as well as they could.
The gameplay outside of combat didn't do much to win me over either. The game's pacing feels a little off. There's more walking and talking than I'd like. The first game was really good about always having something engaging for you to do. Some form of puzzle or narrative hook to keep you engaged beyond holding the left stick forward and listening to some dialogue. But Hellblade 2 seems more content to just set you on a path and let you admire the scenery, which again is shockingly well rendered, but it gets a little old. The final element of the gameplay was similarly a little disappointing. The puzzles feel like a bit of a downgrade. Actually, this may be the thing I disliked the most. The first game had puzzles that felt like they really gelled with both the literal narrative that was presented and the psychosis that Senua experiences. Things like identifying various shapes and patterns in the environment, subtle shifts in your surroundings when passing through a gateway, or avoiding dark spaces because something is going to get you. Hellblade 2 introduces some new puzzles that don't really seem to gel as well. Now, I don't want to speak out of turn, as Ninja Theory have done extensive research and collaboration with those who suffer from and work alongside various psychoses. But it seems to me that some of these puzzles present a bit too much as literal magic. Like these puzzles with mystical bubbles that change the terrain before your eyes, leaving sparkling fairy dust in its wake. Or this one where you do the same thing by lighting and extinguishing fires. The gateways that are unlocked by runes are also a little too extravagant feeling for me. Instead of a normal wood or stone door, they're represented by these intricate fractal patterns which show up in other places throughout the game, and it kinda starts to feel like the devs are showing off. It's another case of the budget seeming to undercut the quality of the game. Ninja Theory had to get creative with the effects they were using in the first game, and consequently it had very unique visuals that emphasized that otherworldly and disorienting feeling. Hellblade 2 feels a little more gamery. Everything feels more literal because it's rendered at a near lifelike level. It's impressive for sure, but it comes at a cost.
This one was hard to write about. I seemingly had a lot of negative things to say, but Hellblade 2 is far from a bad game, and I don't regret playing it. But it had big shoes to fill, and it didn't quite live up to the lofty heights of its predecessor. I would still recommend giving it a go, especially since it's such a short experience. And I am curious to see what Ninja Theory does next, though, truthfully, I hope it doesn't involve Senua.
Thank you for watching this review. If you enjoyed it, leave a like on the video and subscribe if you want to see more. And if you want to support the channel directly, you can support me on Patreon, or you can click the join button below to become a channel member. Either way, you'll get some nice additional benefits as thanks for your donation. Thanks again, and I'll catch you in the next one.